I created a very simple data set, which is unique in that when you look at the Power Query, and this table in particular, it actually runs a DAX query using the analysis services connector. That may well be a bit niche, but it is something which I've used a few times in my own sort of real world data sets. So in this, it's basically useful, when you've got curated data sets out there, which have all your metrics and dimensions and whatnot, and basically, your definitive numbers come from that data set, right? And then you want to create a very particular niche report that has access to your curated data set, but it doesn't. You want to summarize some of the data in there, right? So you don't want to create a proxy data set where you basically just extend the other data set. You actually want to import from the other data set, for instance, and that's one of the use cases I've been using lots, so that you can merge something that comes from a Power BI data set with something that comes from Excel or from another data source, right? So at that point, you need to have it in your Power Query, and basically running a DAX query is the only way to get there. So the example here is sort of very trivial and quite made up, but that's not really the point. So I'm basically filtering my customers to give me only customers with a complete, with a total sales amount over 1,000, right? And then I'm summarizing those customers to basically slice their sales amount by year, right? So that's what's happening. So we're getting a table here which has customer code and name, country, year, and sales amount. And again, that DAX is executed as part of import, right? As part of refresh. So if I close this, we see this is what I'm getting, right? So this is connected to another data set, which has basically the proper definition of sales in it. So that's all fine and good, but the problem is the only way you can authenticate this is using OAuth. And so prior to the April release of pbi-tools, you could not automate that, right? You had to, you could basically automate the model definition deployment, but then you had to go into the workspace, you had to take over ownership, and you had to explicitly set your own credentials, which obviously has two problems. One is it's a manual step. The second is it's tied to you personally, right? If you're moving to a different team or so, right? Chances are that or if you leave the company, chances are that that refresh will no longer work. And so what pbi-tools supports now is a fully automated way to set those OAuth credentials as part of deployment, completely disconnected and independent from any human. So that's what I wanted to show. Basically, I've got my model here. So this one, if we're looking at customers, we can see that Power Query, which we were just looking at, is here, right? Analysis services database. Then I've got my DAX expression here, doing a few transformations to get the column names and column types. Then here, this is just a measures table where I've got a simple sales total, right? So that's it. Obviously, this reference, this analysis service reference, will require credentials, right? So looking here, we've got the credentials part in our deployment manifest. This is the one which was already supported previously, right? Basically, web credentials, anonymous, that came in previously. This is the new one, OAuth 2, type OAuth 2. And there are two ways to achieve that. So this is the more complicated one here. And I'm going to show the simpler one in a bit. So first of all, we need to, in options, we need to ensure that this guy is true. So basically, we've got a data set option called set credentials that needs to be true. Otherwise, all of these will be ignored. Secondly, we need to make sure that the match expression actually matches what we have in place. And so that would be data source type, and in this case, server and database. I'm going to show you in a second how you find out what they're called. And then because it's OAuth 2, what I need here is tenant, client ID, and client secret. So this is basically using a service principal because an interactive login is not possible here, right? That would no longer be automatic. So if we look at the workspace, just let's go here. Right, so that's my workspace. Let me just refresh just to make sure. There we go, right? So let me delete that actually. So this is the one I want to deploy now. So I just have one report here, and then I've got 3 different versions of my Contoso data set, which is the underlying one, the one I'm actually, the one I'm accessing, right? If I now go here and basically run this deployment, right? So this is called Contoso, which I'm referencing here. It does parameter replacements. It will then list all the data sources, and it will finally set the access token for analysis services, and then it will do a refresh. So here we go. Access token, and now refresh. We can see, there we go, already done, right? So this is my customers table. We've read 4,000 rows from that table, which is basically executing the DAX expression, right? If I now go into my workspace, refresh, I've got this here. If I create a report, I can do sales by country, for instance. Here we go, right? So that works, but it's not composite, it's not direct query, it's import, but with another Power BI data set and a specific DAX expression. If you want to have a reference, go to the pbi-tools release notes for the RC3. I added those extra blocks recently because someone actually asked about documentation on one of the issues, so I've made it available for everyone here. So this is the use deployment token example, and this is the explicit example where you're specifying details for a different service principal. And that doesn't just work for analysis services, it basically works for any it would also work for Azure SQL, for instance, right? Basically any Microsoft resource that allows service principal access.